Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
And welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is an hour devoted to learning something more, not just about the world of shoes and ships and sealing wax, as my dearest loves me to say, but about how, what, and why we believe as we do. An hour for the open-minded, willing to challenge some of those old ideas behind what we think we know, who we are, and who we might become. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right, our chat room is open, and my partner Ravinder awaits you there now. You can log on by going to eldontaylor.com/chat. All right, Rav, it's time for you to invite everyone to the chat room and add your words of wisdom for the day.
My words of wisdom. Actually, I'm really excited about today's show. So that's where I am. My words of wisdom would be pay attention. There is something that you will learn. And in the meantime, come join me in the chat room. That is eldontaylor.com/chat.
Remember, if you know everything already,
you know nothing.
There's no chance that you're going to learn. All right. Every week I read some of your letters as our way of paying respect to the very important role you play in making this show successful. Last week, our show featured Nick Ortner and was all about EFT or tapping. Diva Doc wrote, I like this show a lot, very much like what I have learned in Ayurveda. I probably will get the book and we'll check out the webpage. Shelley wrote, I was listening to your radio program today on tapping. Personally, I do not believe that it works at all. I can form an honest opinion on the subject because I paid a few $100s to learn how to do it from some reputable people. As we were going through the process, I found myself saying what the experts wanted me to say, but I knew deep down inside I felt nothing at all. I didn't want to appear like their help was not aiding because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I have general anxiety disorder, and more than anything, I would love to have tapping alleviated. I didn't just do it one time or one day, but gave it an honest-to-goodness shot. I even bought a book explaining how it worked and the proper technique, but when I performed the ritual, there was no real relief. As for the story about the woman with a spinal injury, telling someone that by just tapping, I think the placebo effect kicked in, to steal a phrase, what you believe matters. Well, thanks for the letter, Shelley. You and I have discussed that, haven't we, Ravinder, where you actually have this rapid fire, you have the person there, they're in front, they're on a stage, they're called upon to confess their life, and then you're telling them, and this is disappearing, and the kind of pressure that a person is placed under in that situation, not at all uncommon for what Shelley describes, for you to just go along with it. And at the same time, even where you have people that have said, okay, that worked, 24 hours later, it's an entirely different story. Comment on that?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. There are just lots and lots of different factors that come into play.
All right, Glenn wrote, Hi, Dr. T. Heard your show today on tapping. Frankly, I'm not sold on tapping. Can't say it's 100% ineffective, but everyone who are tappers should be multimillionaires living in mansions along the beach with happy and completely healthy lives with wonderful relationships. But that ain't the case. It is something that will bring issues to the surface which may not normally be seen, but I don't think just tapping your way into massive abundance is the answer. Ange wrote, Hi, Eldon, love your show, but I really do not think very highly of tapping. I have read Nick Ortner's book and also watched several of the online videos. There does seem to be some mixed messaging when it comes to tapping. Is it or is it not supposed to be related to Chinese meridian systems? If it is related, then the tapping points that Mr. Ortner suggests make no sense. If it's not related, then surely you could tap anywhere or on anything. I tend to think that any successes Mr. Ortner is having can be attributed more to his own skills at psychotherapy. Getting to the core of any issue is the most important step for any healing process, and that is really the only thing I see him do that is of any value. I suppose the tapping process itself could be akin to the anchoring system used in NLP, or maybe it is just a distraction technique to stop you focusing on the problem. Who knows? I do also see great similarities with the technique that Darren Weissman uses, affirming declaring that the issue is over. I really do wish that we could simply wish our problems away. Thanks for the show and keep up the good work. That's an interesting letter. Ravinder? you and I have discussed this very point. Anchoring, and Darren Weissman, who's been on our show, does something very similar to this. And when you're declaring a problem is resolved, that it's over, let me ask you this. Do you think that by making that declaration, you have done anything more than mask that problem, assuming that you genuinely believe that declaration?
That's true. I mean, that is definitely true. It's a bit like affirmations as well. Affirmations can work. They work in their place. And if you declare it hard enough and fast enough, then maybe it has more power. But it all depends on what kind of issue it is that you're looking at. If you're looking at something that is really minor, then maybe it could work 100%. But I tend to think that if you're dealing with a serious kind of issue, it's only going to come back. At least that's my thinking.
Richard wrote, very interesting show. One more case of phenomena with lots of experiential anecdotal proof. I think we need a new word to describe such occurrences so that people, including so-called skeptics, have a place intellectually to store such regularly occurring events without feeling the ego-driven need to trash the possibilities these events portend. It is the hallmark of the breakaway mind that they are able and willing to place ambiguous and unresolved events in limbo for as long as necessary without feeling overwhelmed by cognitive dissonance. If we need an easily understood, publicly viable, skeptically acceptable way to do the same for phenomena of the sort discussed today. Laughing people off the stage because the science does not yet exist is like softly killing the messenger. This would be a good assertion to forward to Mr. Shermer. Well, thanks for the comments, Richard, and we may just take that up with Dr. Shermer today. Now, for the last 3 weeks, I have been on a bit of a rant regarding what I see as a very real miasma of the so-called New Age, and that is this. There are many folks who have swallowed whole the notion that refusing to see anything other than their own selfish interest is wrong. Indeed, one letter that I read on the air made the assertion that bad things only happen if you turn on your radio or TV and listen to the fear in the news. Another letter responding to Einstein's statement that evil will persist unless good people do something about it stated that as long as they had clean sheets and good food and ignored the issues in the world, everything was hunky-dory. I took exception to this indulgent, cargo cult, I would think of, form of self-esteem that borders so closely to narcissism that they are sometimes, in my view, indistinguishable. To that end, Leslie wrote, quote, "You set out what is a concern for me. When terrible things are happening in the world, I keenly feel the assorted agonies, almost viscerally at times. However, I have also observed that the media sells more papers and has more shows watched when they are playing up tragedies and violent acts of nature to the hilt. I hate to be a pawn in a game, and yet I know that what hurts a part of humanity hurts us all. So I personally have found that I check in with the media but do not make it a daily staple, and I welcome all opportunities to assist in a real positive way when they come within my purview. This week I was struck by my 92-year-old mother's response to depictions of suffering in the recent floods in Calgary. People's houses were flowing downstream, and there is no insurance coverage available for such damage. My mother actually lives in Calgary, thankfully on one of the many hills. She expressed a feeling of terrible guilt that there was nothing she could do to help these people. I was in a nearby town on Saturday participating in a farmer's market when I learned that 3 large trucks were being filled with goods to assist folks stranded by the floods throughout southern Alberta. Making a donation and spreading the word about the trucks and telling my mother about this development assuaged a goodly amount of guilt that day. Thanks for raising this issue. It matters and certainly does not have an easy answer." Well, thanks for the thoughtful letter, Leslie. I do hope we can all act to assist one another without the pangs of guilt. And still, I know only too well how uncomfortable it can seem when others are suffering and there doesn't seem to be too much that you can do about it. That said, remember, there are frauds born with every tragedy designed to take advantage of this guilt by getting us to give to some phony charities, so be careful. Moving on, Ophelia wrote, "Hello, Dr. Eldon. I am from Singapore. Great listening to you. Very interesting shows." Jasper wrote, "I enjoy your shows, your honesty, and your courage. Thanks for the great variety of guests you host." Now, Kathleen wrote, "I can't believe you're bringing Michael Shermer to Hay House Radio. This is supposed to be radio for your soul. He has nothing to say that's uplifting and everything to say that's demeaning and attacks our teachings. You should be ashamed of yourself." I'm sorry. I guess I should say ouch, But Kathleen, I take exception to your letter. First, I simply don't believe that we are on the same page, let alone share the same teachings. Rather, I think we are more than a tad apart. I am interested in getting to the factual information, to the truth, not to the baubles, trinkets, or the smoke and mirrors that many offer as so-called way out. Here on this show, we seek to maximize the human experience via the love of knowledge, Sophia, if you will, commonly thought of today as philosophy. One of the most important branches of philosophy is epistemology. What is it we can say we know, and how can we claim to know anything? We have hosted a variety of guests and made inquiries over a veritable gambit of ideas ranging from ghosts and poltergeists to aliens and UFOs, from remote viewing and OBEs to NDEs and hospice counseling, from healing codes to tapping, from past life regressions and reincarnation to mindfulness, from entrepreneurial methods to asceticism, and so on. We have hosted Hollywood greats, business people, politicians, nurses, PhDs, MDs, authors, inventors, and more. Why would I not invite one of the world's best-known skeptics to Provocative Enlightenment? I've read his books, and where it might sometimes seem that he's a bit of a cynic rather than a skeptic, at least in the sense of the ancient Greeks' use of skepticism, he nevertheless marshals arguments that should not be ignored. Disagree with him sometimes, maybe, but ignore him, that may be at the peril of being made to appear uninformed and foolish. I'm reminded here of something my architect friend Richard said regarding the unwillingness of some to hear out both sides. In his words, quote, "There are those who vent anger and vitriol at their opposition rather than making a reasonable argument, and then they eviscerate one for taking an opposing view. In a democracy, anyone with a particular cause would need a few votes from the other side to get their legislative objectives. You'd think a few people would get the idea that the other side deserves to be heard and understood at the very least. I just can't resist the itch to straighten out malicious and vituperative slogans." Close quote. So, Kathleen, I'm going to leave your letter there, but I'll use it to segue our way into today's show. As such, that's all the time we're going to take for letters today, but I do invite you to opine by sending your email to eldon@eldontaylor.com or by joining me on Facebook. We can't get all your letters on the air, but they do impact our programming, and once again, I both appreciate and thank you for your feedback and continued support. Now to today's show, Why People Believe Weird Things, with our special guest, Dr. Michael Shermer. Michael Shermer began his undergraduate studies at Pepperdine University, initially majoring in Christian theology, later switching to psychology. He completed his bachelor's degree in psychology at Pepperdine in 1976. He completed his master's degree from California State in experimental psychology in 1978, and he earned his Ph.D. at Claremont Graduate University in the history of science in 1991. Dr. Shermer is an author, science writer, historian of science, founder of the Skeptic Society, and editor-in-chief of its magazine, Skeptic, which is largely devoted to investigating pseudoscientific and supernatural claims. In addition to being the publisher of Skeptic magazine, he writes a monthly column for Scientific America, is an adjunct professor at Claremont Graduate University and Chapman University, and is the author of the books The Believing Brain, Why People Believe Weird Things, Why Darwin Matters, The Mind of the Market, How We Believe, one of my favorites, Denialism, and The Science of Good and Evil. He has appeared on such shows as The Colbert Report, 2020, Dateline, Charlie Rose, Larry King Live, Tom Snyder, Donahue, Oprah, Lisa, Unsolved Mysteries, and other shows as a skeptic of weird and extraordinary claims, as well as interviews in countless documentaries aired on PBS, A&E Discovery, the History Channel, the Science Channel, and the Learning Channel. Additionally, he was the co-host and co-producer of the 13-hour Family Channel television series, Exploring the Unknown. Qualified? Without a doubt. So let's get him in here. Welcome to Provocative Enlightenment, Dr. Michael Shermer.
Hi, Eldon. How are you?
Good. I hope you didn't fall asleep during that introduction.
No, it's all fine. I enjoy listening to the letters.
Good. To begin with, let me share a note with our audience that you sent to my office. You wrote, quote, "I hope this isn't going to just be a monologue in which he asks me questions and I just deliver mini lectures. Good radio is a dialogue in which the host actually listens to what I am saying and reacts to it, rather than just reading a script and tuning out after he asks the questions." Close quote. So now, all right, I want to assure you that I do listen, and there are a few past guests that would tell you perhaps I listen too intently. I would rather have one thought fully fleshed out than a dozen pieces missing the detail. So now, around here, we like to know who is the messenger, what is the message, and how do we use it? So to that end, let's begin by learning something more about you. Research informs us that you were once a fundamentalist Christian, but converted from a belief during your graduate studies and have since described yourself as an agnostic or non-theist. Please flesh that out and share that story with us.
Sure, happy to do so. Yeah, I became a born-again Christian in 1971 when I was in high school at the behest of a friend, and I really got into it. It wasn't just a passing fad for me. I read the Bible cover to cover. I took courses in it. I went to Pepperdine University to major in theology, eventually switching to psychology. But I took courses in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the writings of C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis, for example, and then I became a kind of a born-again atheist for a while, going door to door, taking back everything I said before. Not just kidding. But I was serious about it. I mean, I really believed that there was a God, that Jesus was my Savior, and all that. I did, and then I don't. I don't anymore, and the reasons are multifarious. But mainly, I recognized in my studies of world religions and comparative mythology and the psychology and social psychology of beliefs that everybody who believes in God and in a particular religion believes that theirs is the one true religion and the one correct God. And it doesn't take long to figure out that, well, they can't all be right. I mean, somebody's right, the rest are all wrong, or perhaps they're all wrong, or maybe wrong isn't the right word. Maybe it's just they're socially constructed. That's what I ended up concluding, and that we've made up God and God concepts in our heads for a variety of reasons, and that the religions are depending on where you happen to be born. If you're born in the United States in the 20th century, you're very likely a Christian, probably Presbyterian or Baptist. If you're born in India, you're very likely, Hindu, and born in China, you're probably Buddhist, and so forth. So that alone tells us that religion is different than, say, science. If you were born in India, you wouldn't be doing a different kind of physics than you would if you were born in the United States. There's just one kind of physics. But there's lots of different kinds of religions. So that tells us right there that religion and science are different things. And so for me, my main interest is the study of the psychology of belief, why any of us believe anything that we believe, and how we come to those conclusions. And so for me, I'm eternally, if I can use that word, I'm eternally interested in the psychology of religious beliefs, because I was once very deeply religious, now I'm not. But I'm interested in other people's journeys on that in that way. You would have studied experimental psychology in the 70s. And I would imagine that B.F. Skinner and his brand of behaviorism had a major influence on your life because of his dominance in the field at that time. Do you see the human condition today more or less in the same light as Skinner from those days? I don't. I was definitely influenced by behaviorism. I was trained in a behaviorist lab. In fact, spent 2 years running experiments with rats and pigeons in Skinner boxes, so I know the paradigm quite well. But Skinner got it wrong about human nature. He put way too much emphasis on the environment and not enough emphasis on the fact that we actually are born with a nature. And so I think the evolutionary psychologists today have largely won that battle, that, it's nature and nurture. And here I find, I think the Christians are closer to a correct understanding of human nature in that they use the word sin. I wouldn't use the word sin, but original sin. But we are born with a nature that leads us to be under certain conditions, and if we make the wrong choices, evil or sinful. We can be greedy and avarice and selfish and nasty and bellicose and violent and aggressive and jealous. And there's a whole host of emotions, negative emotions, that are part of the suite of our emotions that comes with our nature. And so one of the things I do in my book, Why Darwin Matters, is to try to convince conservative Christians that, in fact, the Darwinian worldview more closely matches their worldview than it does that of liberals. Liberals tend to emphasize too much the environment, and that human nature is just totally flexible and plastic, and therefore social engineering can fix our problems. It has failed utterly. I think the behaviorist worldview has been put to the test, and it has failed the test.
I totally agree. That is Zimbardo's Lucifer effect. And we've discussed that a lot on this show. Now, one of the common methods, I want to get, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. What were you going to say?
Saying, did you have Phil on your show? He's a very interesting guy.
Yeah. The answer is no, I haven't had him on the show yet, but we have discussed the Lucifer effect in great detail.
Oh, great. Yeah.
I want to get some of the business out of the way and then just jump right into your books and the ideas that you are putting forward to advance our understanding as to why we do believe the things that we believe. But one of the common methods employed by cynics, if you will, as well as skeptics, to dismiss some arguments is what I think of as the belly laugh approach. And I'm going to ask you directly about that. I'm sure you're aware of it. Paul Kurtz is credited with instructing some in the art of dismissal by stating, one good belly laugh is worth 1,000 syllogisms. So if you can laugh at it, if you can frame a subject in such a way as to get others to laugh, you need not deal with the argument at hand. You have been accused of utilizing that. You have a great sense of humor. I watched some of your TED deliveries, if you will. I'm going to ask you directly, do you ever employ this technique when you're dealing with those who object to your point of view?
Well, I don't, actually. I think that quote comes from H.L. Mencken. One good horse laugh is worth 1,000 syllogisms. Yeah, then that was picked up by Martin Gardner, and then I think Paul Kurtz got it from Martin Gardner. So there's a lineage to such quotes. But the point is that, some people do that on both sides. We're all human. We all use emotional outbursts instead of dealing with arguments in their own case. No, I don't do that. At least I try not to do that. It's irrelevant whether you laugh at something or not. I tend to take people's arguments seriously, and I know the arguments because I was once a born again Christian. I know all the arguments, and they were serious arguments when I made them, and when people make them now, I take them as serious arguments and deal with them as such. I did forget to answer your previous question about the difference between agnostic and atheism and all that. And what am I? I make the distinction between atheist and agnostic. And agnostic just doesn't know, in the sense it's not knowable. And I would agree with Thomas Huxley, who coined the word, that there are certain questions that we cannot answer, not even in principle. And I think the God question is one of those. I don't think there's some scientific experiment we're going to run or some new data we're going to collect that's going to decide the issue once and for all.
I'm going to have you hold it right there, Dr. Shermer. We'll pick that up when we come back from the break, but the computer's going to kick us out here real quick. We're on a hard break. We're speaking with Dr. Michael Shermer about his books, Why People Believe Weird Things and the Believing Brain. If you're not in our chat room, get there. We have a wonderful film of our guest today for you to watch. Just go to eldontaylor.com/chat. Do stay tuned. You don't want to miss what's coming up after a few words from some of our friends.
Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're speaking with Dr. Michael Shermer about his books, Why People Believe Weird Things and The Believing Brain. And these are two books that I think everybody should read. Now, I'm gonna break from the normal way we do things here, because Ravinder had a marvelous comment during the break that I want her to express right now. Rav, what was that comment?
Well, we were talking about the correspondence you got from the person who said this is radio for the soul, and what the heck are you doing having Michael Shermer on here? And my thoughts to that is it is definitely radio for the soul, because the soul cannot grow if it's deaf.
Amen.
Now, if you're blocked in a box, you're not going anywhere.
Amen, amen. All right, Dr. Shermer, you were suggesting that you're agnostic, I believe, and basically making a point about the nature of unprovable arguments. You know, Kurt Gödel said first principles are inherently unprovable. You were referring to a Huxley quote. Please pick that up. I don't want to put words in your mouth, and continue what you were saying. Dr. Shermer?
Yep, I'm here. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, please.
Okay, there. You can hear me now, okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. Yep. So, people that are strong atheists who claim that there is no God, I think, cannot really prove that. All you can do is say, I have no belief in a God, which is a sort of a weak atheist position. What Huxley meant by agnostic is that it's not knowable. There's no experiment we're going to run that defines it once and for all. So, on a ontological level, of that is the technical question, does God exist? I don't know. No one, neither do I. Sometimes I call myself a militant agnostic. I don't know, and you don't either. But technically speaking, we can't prove it. But behaviorally, there are no agnostics. You act as if there is a God or there isn't a God, and I assume there isn't. So in that sense, I'm an atheist. The terms themselves are loaded. I don't like using the terms. If possible, I avoid them. I just say I'm a skeptic because that's the name of my magazine. But in fact, I think that's the way to think about it. There is that distinction between what we know and how we act.
You know, one of the interesting things, and this is a bit personal, but one of the interesting things that I find in reading your material is I concur with so much of what you, if I follow your trail, I'm basically going to go right with you till you get to the conclusion. When you get to the conclusion, it's my experience that changes the outcome for me. And we'll take that up here in a minute. I can't say that I'm agnostic. I have to say I have to believe in some supernatural based on my personal experience, but I'm going to ask you questions about that in a second. You heard the setup piece. What's your take on this New Age cradle that promises whatever feels good to everyone?
Right. Well, I've been wanting a new Tesla all-electric sports car, and the universe just won't give it to me. I keep going out to my driveway every morning. Nope, still not here. It's not enough to just wish for things and want them and desire them. You actually have to go do something about it. That's the only way to make it happen. And that we understand from pure naturalistic processes at work. Brain thoughts, neurons firing, muscles moving, behavior, action, go work, earn money, buy a Tesla. That's the only way to get it. The universe doesn't just smile upon us when we want something. And if that were true, what about all the negative things? Disease, cancer, deaths, terrorist attacks, accidents, things like that. Does that mean the universe is mad at us? By the way, this would apply to the God subject as well. I mean, people after disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, and whatnot, are always thankful that the Lord saved them, and they thank Jesus and so on, that their house wasn't destroyed. Well, what does it mean for the hundreds and thousands of other people's homes that were destroyed, people who were killed? Does that mean God didn't know about them, or he was mad at them, or he did it himself? He allowed it to happen? I mean, once you go down the pathway of attributing supernatural intervention into natural forces, then you have to explain why the bad things happen, not just the good things.
That's exactly right. I totally concur on that. We have had many discussions on this show about the notion as put forth in The Secret and other places that you Well, anyway, you articulated it much better than I did. Let's begin then with your books. Why do people, even very smart people, in your view, believe weird things? I mean, flesh out your thinking on this one for us.
The theory is that we have to believe something. Our brains are wired up to form beliefs. We find patterns, we connect the dots, we construct them into higher order patterns that become beliefs. It's almost impossible not to believe something. That is, if you show subjects, random dot patterns on a screen, or you give them a random series of noises, they will find a meaningful pattern, whether there is one there or not. So finding things that connect and forming beliefs is what we do. And on a most basic level, it's called learning. It's just, connecting the dots, A to B. So my thought experiment is, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3 million years ago, and you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? Well, if you think the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error, a false positive. You thought A was connected to B, and it's not. But no harm. You just become more vigilant and cautious. But if you think the rustle in the grass is just the wind, and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. You've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. So we're the descendants of those who are most likely to make type 1 errors, false positives, rather than type 2 errors, false negatives. So in other words, the default rule of thumb is just to assume everything you see and hear is real, just in case it is. And that's the basis of superstition and magical thinking. It's not a product of ignorance or lack of education or anything like that. All of us are subject to finding patterns that are not actually real and thinking that they are, type 1 errors. And that's the basis of beliefs. And so people just naturally glom onto, like, say, conspiracy theories. 9/11 was an inside job by the Bush administration. I mean, it's just absurd, but you can see how people find patterns and connect the dots and just automatically go there. And that's the problem, is that all of us are susceptible to these beliefs.
Right. But, of course, while you're on the conspiracy theories, I think one of the things that we all have to deal with is when is the conspiracy, when does it really belong to the tinfoil hat folks? And when is it really something like what the NSA and the FBI are doing with all the intelligence data that those tinfoil hats people have been telling us about for so long? How do you sort the fact from the fiction?
That's right. In the case of conspiracy theories, we have to recognize that some conspiracies are real. And so it's not just a matter of, there can be no supernatural explanations. No, some conspiracies are real. Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy, and 9/11 was a conspiracy, technically speaking. 19 members of Al-Qaeda plotting to fly planes into buildings without telling us ahead of time. That's a conspiracy. And the NSA thing, in a way, is a conspiracy. We didn't give our permission for that, like we do with Google and Facebook. We give our permission to let them have our data. We didn't do that with the government. So those things do happen, indeed. They happen for very good reasons. But in that case, you see, we find out about it. They're whistleblowers. And in the case of, say, 9/11 or JFK, there's not one example of anybody coming forward saying, I did it, or I know who did it, and here's the evidence, here's the documents, and so on. Nothing like that.
No whistleblowers. But still, you're left with your analogy. If you assume that it's the wind in the grass once, you're lunch. So you really are caught with, when do you pay attention to this, and when do you, what hallmark do you use yourself, Dr. Shermer, to discern the so-called conspiracy from that which might have some relevance of truth? We have a very famous reporter who broke the McChrystal story, and there's all kinds of new material breaking out on the internet about, how he was killed because he was about to break a CIA story, and on and on. And if you look at that, well, there's a little bit of, what is a Mercedes mortar flying over here in a head-on crash? How do you take a situation like that? And I'm giving it to you because it's real life and it's in the news. How do you look at that and say, well, this is something I should pay attention to, or no, this is just nonsense and hogwash? What thinking process do you apply?
Right. Well, I use several criteria. First of all, the more people that have to be involved, the less likely the conspiracy theory is true, because people are incompetent and they can't keep their mouth shut. In other words, the more people that are involved, the more likely we are to hear about it. As in the Snowden example, where it's just this kid working as a contractor, and he just decided to take it upon himself and get his 15 minutes of fame, and he wanted to be a freedom fighter and hero and all that stuff. Well, those sorts of things do happen. Like Watergate was a conspiracy. Here you have the most powerful administration on the planet, and they couldn't even do a hotel break-in. So usually we find out about these things. And the longer time has gone by where we haven't found out anything, there's been no whistleblowers, then the rumors are less likely to be true. And also the more grandiose the conspiracy theory, world domination, taking over the United States, things like that are very unlikely to be true. Much more likely are very specific things like we're looking for patterns in phone records. That actually makes sense. Of course, that is the kind of thing the NSA would do. That's what they're supposed to do. So, in that sense, imagine if we didn't find out about the NSA now, but that, in fact, there was another terrorist attack on the United States, and we then found out that the NSA could have prevented it by monitoring phone calls, but they didn't. Then we'd be upset about that, right?
Well, and that's pretty close to what happened with 9/11. So, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. How come the FBI and the CIA and all the different branches of government were talking to each other to figure out what was going to happen, that this is going to happen? So, exactly. So, in hindsight, it's called the hindsight bias. It's always 2020. After the fact, it's easy to go back and connect the dots and go, how come they didn't see that pattern? And the answer is because, well, in the case of the Bush administration and the famous piece of intel of August 6, 2001, when Condoleezza Rice got that memo that Osama bin Laden will attack the United States and U.S. soil, how come they didn't act on that? Well, because, Condoleezza Rice had 1,000 pieces of information that week, that this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And, after the fact, pick out the one that actually did happen and say, how come you didn't act on that? But that's not fair.
No.
That's the curse of knowledge. You already know what happened. She didn't know what was going to happen. And so it's not fair to take that 1,000 pieces of intel and say, you should have known it was going to be that way.
Okay, but while we're looking at multiple, let's take the multiples and let's look at them differently. You've written or spoken on a number of diverse subjects like OBEs and spoon bending and UFOs and graphology and remote viewing, even the alleged Bible cult. My question would be, is there anything that you find in common with all of these, and if so, what is it?
Well, the most common one is just the propensity for people to find patterns that aren't really there, and also to infuse those patterns with agency, hidden agents, secret, invisible, powerful, hidden agents, gods and ghosts and aliens and demons and poltergeists and ghosts and things like that. Those are all invisible, hidden forces at work. And again, our brains just tend to do that. They tend to just go there for that, whether they're there or not. And so we have to be very careful about that.
All right, I'm going to ask you something that I think maybe has a little bit of bearing on, your personal background, where you are, how you got there, et cetera. But, one of the most famous atheists in our lifetime, Anthony Flew, had a change of heart. He stated that the rejection of religious faith was the start of his career as a philosopher. In his famous falsification argument, which represented, it's best shared in his parable of the garden, argued effectively that the idea of God is philosophically meaningless. I think that's a good way to say it, since he cannot be falsified. Now, in his book, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind, he insisted that it was science that changed his mind. Some, I believe, have flatly rejected his conversion and pointed out he won $1 million prize for changing his mind, and it did come at the end of his life, and there's a psychology to end of life, and so on and so forth. Why do you believe people like Fluke can live their lives, make a point of reference, become famous, and then change a position at the end? Is this just there are no atheists in the foxhole argument?
I don't think so. I think there's no evidence for the atheists in the foxhole in any case. But, of course, there's going to be individual examples like that. But if somebody offered me $1 million, I might consider changing my mind. Just kidding. Yeah, so the case of Anthony Flew is a peculiar one. He was, he was getting a little senile toward the end. I think that book was largely written by somebody else. But to be fair to him, I think he got taken in by the intelligent design argument without reading the counter argument. That is, I think he didn't put the time in to research what had been written counter to the intelligent design argument, of which there is a lot. In other words, the intelligent design creationists put forward a series of new arguments that the old creationists had not used, and that Anthony Flew got sort of swept up by, because they're pretty good arguments until you read the counter arguments. I think he just didn't. I just think he didn't read the counter arguments. That's my opinion.
Okay, now I would challenge your use of the word senile.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think you have any evidence for that, but it does it does attend a little bit of humor. Nevertheless, let's take that on. What is the good counter argument? Assume I am Anthony Flew, and I have made my argument based on science. What is your counter argument?
Well, it depends on the specific one. Like the thing about the bacteria flagellum that Michael Behe makes a big deal about in his book Darwin's Black Box, is that there was no predecessors to the bacteria flagellum. It's just this complex system just appeared poof. And therefore, there's no Darwinian stepwise way to gradually get there. But that's not true. If you read what microbiologists have researched about the bacterial flagellum, there's a whole series of simpler machines that lead up to the current bacterial flagellum, and there's a series of DNA sequences that become more complex that build those little structures. So, in fact, there is a very clear Darwinian gradual stepwise way to get from here to there, to get from 0 to 1, so to speak. And that's the case, too, with the blood clotting mechanism, the eye. The eye is another favorite. In almost every case that the intelligent design creationists make, there are good natural explanations for how it came about. Now, the fact that we don't have an answer to everything doesn't mean that the other side is right. That's a logical fallacy. If you say, well, I don't think A is true, therefore B must be right. No, that isn't the case. A may be wrong, and B may not be right either.
So what do you say to the theist, then, Dr. Shermer, who says, the natural way of life is the natural order that was created. We're not a strict creationist. I don't believe in strict creationism, and that doesn't necessarily negate the idea that there isn't something supernatural. It doesn't mean that Darwin was wrong. Maybe that is the natural process, the natural order of laws, the way the mathematic of the universe is designed.
Yeah, that's the argument I make in my book, Why Darwin Matters, is that Christians should accept evolution as the way God created life. I mean, God has to use some kind of forces of nature to make this world run. He uses gravity to create solar systems, for example, and stars and galaxies and stuff. Why not assume that he used evolution to create life? That he has to use some kind of force, some kind of mechanism. You can't just reach into the pie and just poof, create complex systems. They have to come about through some kind of natural forces. So, just like in every other aspect of life. So, I don't think evolution is a threat, or should not be a threat to anybody's faith. It really doesn't have to be.
I totally concur. Let's stay with Flew for a second then. Two-part question for you. First, has anyone ever shared an experience with you that has caused you to question matters such as life after death? And do you have any beliefs on this nature, yourself? Is there such a thing as life? Go.
Yeah. I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens. I think... but literally you can't experience death. All you can experience would be the dying process. Just to experience something, you actually have to be alive. So by definition, you can't experience it. I'm not really worried about it. I don't think about it a lot. I think it's better to focus on the here and now in this world and try to be a good person, try to do the right thing, try to make the world a little bit better place, and leave it just better off than when you came here. I think where we go after life is the same place we were before we were born. Like, in other words, what happens to you after you die same thing that happens to you before you were born. That is, there's just nothing non-existent.
All right, tell me about being human. I mean, you hit on that. Let's assume that we just hold in a state of suspense the notion of whether or not there is a life after death, and we do invest ourselves totally in being that better person here and now, which I think is a philosophy that should fit regardless of whether or not you're a humanist, an atheist, a Christian, a Buddhist, a Taoist, or whatever else. How do you see human behavior optimized?
Well, I think we have a good part of our nature and a bad part of our nature, and I think the point of society is to structure it in a way that enhances the good part of our nature. So, democracy and free markets and rule of law and a fair justice system and so on. These sound currency and banking system. These are all the characteristics of an advanced society that has, through thousands of years of experimentation, figured out there's certain things that draw out the best, the better angels of our nature, to quote Abraham Lincoln. There's certain things that do that. Dictatorships, theocracies, monarchies, they don't do this as well as democracies. Too much government intervention into the marketplace is not good for people. It's bad. We need to be free. People want to be free to make choices and so on. And too much infringement on our freedom, I think, hampers our nature to come out and be, hampers are the better angels of our nature.
Dr. Shermer, we only have a couple of minutes here. Bottom line, your philosophy of life for you personally, being a better human, is?
Just to try to make a difference, try to change the world, try to just be a good person. First and foremost, take care of yourself and your family. Then take care of your friends and your coworkers, and do the right thing by them. Then expand your circle out into your immediate community and your society, and eventually out all the way to the whole globe. Try to make a difference. Try to do something that matters in a positive direction. Not rocket science. We all know what's the right thing to do to help people.
Okay. How does that philosophy differ from the philosophy you would have had you remained as a Christian with regards to the purpose of your life?
Well, behaviorally, I don't think it's any different at all. I mean, Christians believe that you should go out and do the right thing and help people. So the end result, I think, is the same. I would hope that Christians are helping people for the inherent goodness of the act itself and not for some reward in the next life.
And that to me is the bottom line. That is the most important message that Dr. Michael Shermer has to share with you. A lot of people are afraid of you. They don't want to discuss you. They don't want to talk about. They see you as, the big bad wolf, the guy in the corner, that doesn't believe anything, that has no purpose but purposelessness. And that's not at all what I find in your material. I'm very appreciative of the fact that you chose to join us and share a little bit of who you are personally and what your philosophies are. How does our listening audience in about 20 seconds learn more about you, get copies of your books, and so forth?
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes. Skeptic.com is our webpage, michaelshermer.com, or you can just go to Amazon, type in Michael Shermer or The Believing Brain or any of that, or Wikipedia, you just type in my name, Michael Shermer. So I'm pretty accessible online, and I answer my own emails.
So, right, Dr. Shermer. All right, we've come to the end of another hour of Provocative Enlightenment, and I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank that behind-the-scenes team, Kyle and Joe, as well as the gang at Hay House Radio for making what we do so pleasurable. I want to remind you that listen, if you enjoyed our show or you agree or you disagree, please write us. Please let me know what you think. We're interested in what you believe.